There's a very important element that we see in this story, especially from Peter, that can be applicable to our lives. Something that doesn't happen very often with first century Palestinian fishermen. But I think Peter's understanding of what was going to happen to his life, although he didn't know the eventual outcome, church tradition said he was, of course, crucified upside down, and I'm sure that wasn't in his mind as the Lord asked him to go further out into the lake to catch fish. But nonetheless, Peter understood that Christ was a great teacher, and that as a good Jew, his obedient response would be, "Yes, Master," and they go out. Even though Peter lets him know, we've been out already and we haven't caught anything, which is an interesting thing for Peter to say. He doesn't just say, "Yes, Master, oh sure, whatever you say." He lets the Lord know that he doesn't think it's a good idea, which is very typical of Peter as you read his life. He's always willing to get in the first word. And so they head out onto the lake. Gennesaret is another name for the lake of the Sea of Galilee. And they're fishing, and they put their nets in the other side, and they draw them up, and they're super heavy, and they're all amazed. All the fishermen are amazed that this has happened. And Peter switches from calling Jesus Master and recognizes him as the Messiah, calls him Lord, recognizes his sinfulness. And at that moment, Peter reaches a threshold in his life. I think at some point he realized that he was no longer going to be able to be just a fisherman. And we arrive at those moments every single day of our lives. They're called thresholds. We crossed two this morning when we came in through the front doors and then into here. We cross them every door we go through. They're a threshold. They're a difference in space from one place to another. If you're going to a business, the threshold where you open the door and when you step in is the moment in which you enter into the contract with the business owner. They're very important, and yet oftentimes we're completely oblivious to them all. We go about our day making decisions, making threshold decisions, not being aware where we're going to be led this way or that. When Peter makes the decision, when Jesus says to him, "I will make you fishers of men. From now on you will be fishers of men." And Peter and his fellow fishermen decide that they're going to give up everything and leave to follow Christ. This is an immense threshold moment for Peter, to give up a life that is the only life he's ever known. He's making a decision to change the entire trajectory of his existence, which will eventually end in his martyrdom. And I think too often we are unaware of how important those thresholds are in our own lives. When we make decisions to enter into darkness instead of light. When we make decisions to enter into apathy instead of love. Because hate is not the opposite of love. To hate someone, you have to genuinely have a passion for them. It comes out in the wrong way. The opposite of love is apathy. And one could never accuse Peter of being apathetic. If anything, Peter was far too zealous and far too passionate, and often got himself in places where he needed the Lord to rescue him from. I think of in the garden when Peter decided that it was wiser to cut off the ear of the temple's servant, the high priest's servant, than to go willingly and follow with his Lord. I think of Peter, denying Christ in the temple. And it's not like Peter was, out of Christ's sightline or off somewhere where Christ could not see him. He was right there looking at him. And again, Peter's faced with a threshold moment. Do I acknowledge Christ as the Messiah, or do I deny him? And Peter denies him, as we know. And the Lord comes to him after the resurrection and comes to Peter again and asks him. And again, Peter's faced with a threshold moment. Do I deny the resurrected Christ? Or do I seek forgiveness and make a decision to change my life in an entirely new way. We face those immense decisions every time we face another human being. Every time we encounter a relationship, we make a threshold decision. Am I going to follow it as an obedient servant of Christ into light and love? Am I going to be compassionate, empathetic, kind? Or am I going to follow in the ways of the world and be selfish and arrogant and full of pride and unwilling to acknowledge that I need this other person? So as you go out today and as you go through the week, I encourage you to think about the thresholds that you cross each and every day. To be mindful of the fact that at every moment Christ is with us. At every moment, even when we betray Christ, as St. Peter did. That he will come to us and he will ask us once again to feed his sheep, to love his sheep, to care for them. This is our threshold moment. Are we willing to care for the sheep? It's easy to care for the sheep in here in the pen. It's much, much harder to care for the sheep out there who don't really look like sheep. They look more like goats. And I think it's a very difficult thing to look at a person who looks like a goat and see them as a sheep and decide, you know what, I am going to take and enter into a new space. I am going to cross the threshold of the tomb and I am going to enter into the life of resurrection. And I am going to bring the light and love of Christ in this moment. So I pray for you as well as for me that we would be aware and we would understand how significant those thresholds are in our lives. To the glory of Jesus Christ. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Amen.